Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance. The invitation to this briefing was conveyed in a letter dated 6th of May 2022, addressed by the Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, to all member states, together with an information note on the Global Crisis Response Group. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances related to her travel, the Deputy Secretary General is unable to join the briefing today. She has requested the Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, who is also the coordinator of the Global Crisis Response Group, to provide the briefing in her absence, and is grateful to the Secretary General for doing so. Today's briefing serves to inform the preparations of the second brief of the Global Crisis Response Group, which is to be released before the end of May. On a technical note, I would ask delegations to please bear with us in case of any technical issues in this virtual briefing. To request the floor following the intervention by the Secretary General of UNCTAD, member states can inscribe through the link that has been shared in the chat box. And as usual, I would kindly ask representatives to keep microphones muted until invited to take the floor. I now invite Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD and Coordinator of the Global Crisis Response Group, to make a statement, please.
Thank you very much, Emer, and I thank you to all of you for joining this first virtual briefing on the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance, and I'm taking this opportunity to step in because of the unforeseen circumstances that they precluded the possibility of the DSG to be here with all of you. So let me start by saying that the impacts of the war in Ukraine in all its dimensions is global and is systemic. It is creating, and we have called it this way, a perfect storm of crisis on food, energy and finance, and is exacerbating extreme vulnerabilities for the developing world. Many developing countries were already struggling to recover from the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, facing already record inflation, rising interest rates, and unmanageable debt burdens. Now, they are facing skyrocketing food, energy, and fertilizer bills. So this is a global crisis, and the world needs to come together to find global solutions. That is precisely why the Secretary General established the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance to mobilize a global coordinated response with the UN system, the UN system, the multilateral development banks, the international financial institutions and other institutions to support countries face these challenges. The Secretary General launched the first brief of the Global Crisis Response Group on the 13th of April. And in that brief, it outlines some very clear messages and recommendations for the world to take. So in the report of the Secretary General, he highlighted that the developing world, as I said, is at the brink of a perfect storm of debt, food, and energy crisis. There are elevated levels of socioeconomic stress that follow the COVID-19 crisis and the unremitting cost of climate change. Global exposure to this crisis is counted in the billions of people. So let me here take some of the messages of that first brief. First, according to our analysis, at least 107 countries, and we are for the second brief revising this information. There are 107 countries severely exposed at least to one of the channels of transmission of this crisis. So, as a result, a systemic debt crisis is unfolding as we speak. The food price index and inflation is at multi-decades high, and instances of civil unrest are brewing in many corners of the world. The magnitude of this renewed development challenge calls for a commensurate response. The self-reinforcing nature of the global shocks we are witnessed over the last years clearly shows that a country-by-country approach is ill-suited to a world where an increasing share of the challenges faced by developing countries are the result of global and systemic shocks. So the world has much to do to contribute to fix this. And a lot, I have to say, was done for the COVID-19 pandemic. But much more work remains to be done. So first, it is vital to ensure a steady flow of food and energy through open markets. It means lifting all unnecessary food export restrictions. It means directing surpluses and reserves to those in need. And it means calming the volatility in food markets to prevent prices further escalating. We have already information through the WTO and different trackers of different organizations that there are at least between 17 and 20 countries that already has enacted restrictions on trade of food and energy. The Secretary General's recent visits to Russia, Ukraine, Senegal, Niger, and Nigeria also had a particular focus on the crucial issue of global food security. And the UN Secretary General has said that any immediate solution to global food insecurity and calming the world food commodity markets requires reintegrating Ukraine's grain stock and the food and fertilizer production of Russia and Belarus into world markets. Second, we must maximize this moment to push for sustainable transitions in food systems and energy. In the immediate term, countries must resist hoarding and release strategic stockpiles and additional reserves. We must work towards progressively phasing out coal and other fossil fuels and accelerate the deployment of renewable energy. Third, we need to pull developing countries back from the financial brink. Developed countries and international financial institutions must mobilize existing instruments and use them with flexibility to immediately increase liquidity and fiscal space for the developing world. So in that space, we need to provide emergency debt relief for developing countries. This could include the reactivation of the DSSI initiative, the debt suspension initiative. And we need that to be extended at least for 2 more years, including the extension of maturities up to 5 years. We need to revise the common framework for debt relief. We need that this will be a priority in the agenda and to include flexibility in the common framework for it to really work for the developing countries and all the vulnerable countries. And we must complement these actions, mainly providing flexibility and speed to emergency resources so we can help the countries help their poor and vulnerable through social protection and safety nets scheme. So we need the liquidity through the instruments we have. We have already emergency financing in the international financial institutions. So what we need is to put emphasis on ensuring net positive resource transfers to countries experiencing social and economic distress. Second, we need the IMF lending capacity to be enhanced through the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust and the recently created Resilience and Sustainability Trust that has to be put into operation as soon as possible and secure more pledges for the recycling of existing allocations of special drawing rights. We need to suspend the IMF surcharges on existing lending arrangements. And we have to ease the conditions for access of existing and new lending facilities so as not to deter countries in need from requesting financial assistance. And finally, we need to capitalize and use all the extent of the possibilities of the multilateral development banks that are essential to link the investment of that we need in the short and the long term. So, Your Excellencies, all these proposals put forward by the Secretary General, let me emphasize, are within the existing instruments we have at hand. The international community has the means to cushion the blow and prevent great human suffering and unacceptable increases of inequality and the world falling into an era of social and political unrest. The solutions and the resources are there. We need the political will and the collective action to make it possible. We can avoid another lost decade for the developing world. We can do it, and we should do it together. So thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD for her briefing, and the floor is now open for comments and questions of member states. The first speaker is the permanent representative of Brazil. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking DSG Amina Mohamed for convening this meeting. Extremely useful to get an update. And let me thank also Secretary General of UNCTAD, Ms. Greenspan, for the briefing. I think the first issue here is to really commend the Secretary General and all the institutions involved in the crisis response group for the very speedy response to the issue and the evaluation and the proposals that have been coming forward. I think this is a wonderful example of what we should be doing in the multilateral arena. I take note in particular of the comments of the disproportionate impact of the food insecurity crisis on developing countries, and this is to be expected, I think. I sincerely hope that we, as a multilateral institution, are able to craft a response that is guided more by solidarity than we managed in the COVID crisis, in which developing countries were and still are left to the end of the queue. I don't have any really specific comments. I just would like to launch an appeal that other areas of the Secretariat also engage in this sense of urgency. We are very dispirited that a group of member states have prepared a draft resolution on the issue of food insecurity. And we are confronted essentially with bureaucratic obstacles that would lead to a 17-day delay before its consideration in the GA. So I would urgently appeal to the Secretariat to try and speed up this process. The whole process, the Secretary General has taken great urgency. I think member states should also be allowed to demonstrate this urgency by adopting a resolution quickly in the GA. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia, who will be followed by Italy. Ambassador of Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, DSG Amina and Sekjen Angtet for convening to this informal briefing to prepare for the second briefing of GCRG. I would like to express our strong support for the work of the GCRG. The President of Indonesia is honored to be part of the champion of this group. Last week, our Foreign Minister, Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, met with the UNSG and reiterated President Joko Widodo's message that the GCRG first must bring concrete solution to mitigate the impact of the global crisis, should aim to help countries to cope with the crisis, and strive for multi-stakeholder collaboration to find the right solution, particularly for developing countries and LDCs. In addition, it is also important to align the work of GCRG with various initiatives. For example, on food security, such as the core group of global food insecurity and conflict in Ukraine, a new test of multilateralism initiated by Lebanon, the G7-led Global Food Security Crisis Response proposed by Germany, and the Food and Agriculture Resilient Mission from France. And of course, we look forward to the second brief for the and continue collaboration with all relevant stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Indonesia for his statement, and I now invite the representative of Italy. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for this briefing. Let me say first off that we do value the role and the continued work of the Global Crisis Response Group. It's extremely important that at this stage, in this situation we are now currently facing, the UN provide member states and I would say the international community at large with a clear, exhaustive and evidence-based reading of what is happening on the ground in terms of impact on the global market, and also provides the membership with some solid orientation on what needs to be done in terms of countermeasures and policy recommendations. So we do look forward to the second brief by the Global Crisis Response Group. I think another function that the group can also exercise is try to keep everything together, because there are, as our Indonesian colleague was recalling a minute ago, there are several initiatives that are being born in different international instances and fora. There was a mention to the initiative being brought by being carried out by within the G7, within the EU, My own country is also establishing some outreach initiatives towards African and Mediterranean countries. So there is a lot on our plates. Perhaps the group can, in his second brief, try to create a common thread that ties all these initiatives and trying to maximizing synergies and reducing always possible overlaps. There is one message that came out from the first brief, which is a philosophical message that we fully share, and that is this crisis, this emergency cannot have an individual solution. It must be a global solution. It must come from a global approach. We fully share that. Now, looking at specifically at food insecurity and the set of policy recommendations that were contained in the first brief, and those lines that you also have suggested in your introduction, there is one remark that I wanted to make. This is clearly, eminently, not entirely, but eminently an issue of shortage of supply. So there is indeed the need to make everything that is possible to increase supply, to remove any bottleneck. And you mentioned a couple of issues which are particularly important. I took note of that. One is incentivize member states to release at least part of their strategic stockpiles. So I wonder how this could be done in concrete terms. What kind of incentives could be provided in order for this to happen? Another thing that you mentioned is helping Ukraine to restore its food commodities export into the global market. And I guess the main objective would be to orient these flows especially towards the global south, which is mostly need. Now, we need some concrete ideas in that respect. I wonder whether the group is paying any specific attention, for example, to the possibility of creating some sort of food corridors or alternative routes that could help Ukraine to reestablish its flow of exports towards the global market. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Italy for his statement, and I now invite the ambassador of Lebanon to take the floor, who will be followed by Qatar. Ambassador of Lebanon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank DSG Amina Mohammed for this and appreciate the statements, especially her statement and statement of the head of UNCTAD. It's really very important and very important and helpful at this time. And thank the SG for his leadership on this issue. I just wanted to remind everybody of the initiative that Lebanon and 19 other countries have initiated in the GA, and we're working on. We have the resolution. The draft resolution is out for co-sponsorship, and we really appreciate everybody co-sponsoring this, because it's really important that the membership and the whole world comes together and speaks in one voice about this issue. This is an issue that touches every house. It touches every dining table. It touches every person around the world, especially poor and developing countries and those who are hit very hard by this crisis. So we really appreciate if this process is expedited and that we vote the resolution, and that the world will hear our voice, and hopefully that we can find solutions, and we stand behind all the initiatives that we heard about today. And we can overcome this crisis, because it's really unacceptable in the 21st century that people go hungry. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I thank the permanent representative of Lebanon for her statement, and I now invite the permanent representative of Qatar to take the floor. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I also would like to join my colleagues in thanking the Deputy Secretary General, and of course as well the Secretary General of UNCTAD for briefing us today. Qatar welcomes the initiative of the Secretary General to establish the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance to coordinate a much needed global response to the widespread impact of the current situation, as well including the war in Ukraine and the difficult situations around the globe. And we also very much support the objectives of the GCRG to look at the interconnected crisis in the areas of food, energy, climate, and finance, which is very extremely important since action in each of these areas can affect one another. Qatar has often called for a long-term solutions in food systems, climate change, trade, and finance. Again, as described in the brief, Qatar is deeply concerned of the impact of the war in Ukraine, is having an impact as well on the most vulnerable people around the world who are already suffering the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. Out of concern with the lives of smallholder farmers in drylands on the African continent who are bearing the brunt of climate change, food insecurity, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, Qatar, through the support of Qatar Fund for Development and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, announced recently in March a strategic partnership of the value of $200 million towards agricultural needs, climate resilience, and economic development projects to support smallholder farmers on drylands in the African continent. Let me also raise the point regarding the current draft resolution being presented by Lebanon and a number of countries. I'm very honored to say that Qatar is a co-sponsor of the resolution on the state of global food insecurity. Again, this draft resolution is timely and it expresses deep concern over the current state of global food insecurity, that it could aggravate social and civil unrest and instability. And most importantly, it calls upon the international community to urgently support countries affected by food security through coordinated action. Again, let me reiterate our strong support for the call of the group for a high-level coordination and partnership, urgent action, access to critical data, analysis, and policy recommendations among governments and the multilateral system are very much crucial to deal with these interlinked crises. And I thank you again.
I thank the permanent representative of Qatar for her statement. I don't have further requests for the floor at this time. If delegations would like to ask the floor, please indicate through the chat box. At this time, I just want to double check, but I don't think we have further requests for the floor. It seems not. In that case, I would invite the Secretary General of UNCTAD to give some responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me refer to each of the interventions. And thank you very much for the interventions. Very good, very to the point. So let me first, with respect to the intervention of Brazil, emphasize what Brazil said, the importance of a speedy response, because I think that we still can avoid a general crisis. We can avoid a domino effect, yes? And it is in our hands to be able to do that. And he called for solidarity and also mentioned the draft resolution that Lebanon and other 19 countries have put forward, like did Qatar and Lebanon too, and Indonesia. So very important that the symbol, the signal of the world coming together will be given. I want to emphasize in the intervention of Indonesia, the issue of the multi-stakeholders collaboration. Yes, there are many initiatives out there that he underlined, but this multi-stakeholder part, I think that is very important because we need the international community, we need the governments, we need the private sector, we need civil society. We need really to make an effort to really bring everybody, into the solution, for the solution to be as robust as possible. In the intervention of the ambassador of Italy, thank you very much, because you also emphasize the evidence-based importance of the reading of what is happening. And we will, I think that the first draft, the first brief, was important in that sense. Now, what are we doing? We are even going farther. bringing in the regions and the people that has the knowledge on the ground. And we will put together, quantitative and qualitative information coming also from the countries, from the different networks that we have to put and to try to have a second brief, in a way I call it, that will go from countries to people. Yes, we talked about countries first. Now we will talk about regions, and we will try to zoom into the populations and a lot into the food crisis itself. Yes, so the second brief will have that emphasis, but I need to bring together also some of the things that were said by some of you, that this crisis is interconnected. I think that the ambassador from Qatar said that this crisis is interconnected. So let's be aware that we are all very worried about the food insecurity, because hunger is going up, malnutrition is going up. And we know that when we will have malnourishment in up to 2 years old, their life will be forever, yes, forever a hit. And it will be impossible to really overcome those effects. So food is essential, but remember that the food crisis can come from the other crisis. The food crisis can enter through finance, like already happened, for example, in the example of Sri Lanka. The food crisis came because of financial crisis, because the inability to import, not because the shortage of food. It came through the finance channel. And the same can happen with energy and with the price of fertilizers and energy, because it can hit again the food space, because those crises will also affect the ability of people to buy food. And sometimes people will have to decide what to buy, fuel for their cars to go to work, or food to put in the tables. And so in a way, we have to think about it like a cost of living crisis for the families, for the vulnerable, for the households that are already struggling. So I think that all of you are right in pointing out the food insecurity aspect, but let's remember the interlinkage, because any of the dimensions that we have mentioned that will hit the countries can, have a domino effect into the food problem. If a country have a debt default and cannot pay, their dues, it will have also a terrible effect on the food security of the population. And you have asked, the ambassador of Italy asked specifically how to release stockpiles. We have seen some movement, but I think that we have to raise awareness, because if we take all the food available right now in the world, there is enough food to feed the world. So we have a problem of distribution. We have a problem of transport cost. We have a problem of the disruption of the channels for distribution. We have a problem in the small island developing states that have more trouble to bring up the goods that they need for survival and for health and for and to feed their population. We have problems in the LDCs, yes, but it's a problem also of distribution. It's true that if we don't do what we need to do, we will have a problem of shortages very soon, yes? Because if the small farmers cannot have the fertilizer to plant, yes, if we have no availability of fertilizers in many countries, so the next, a harvest will bring problems of supply to the world. But right now, and I want to emphasize this, right now we are able to feed the world if we can solve the problem of distribution, of liquidity, of restrictions that are affecting the countries. With respect to Ukraine coming back into the market, you have heard the Secretary General about the food corridors, and he is putting a lot of attention on that issue. And I just want to thank the Ambassador of Lebanon for the initiative in the General Assembly. And I really hope that the world can speak with one voice and make that happen very soon in the GA. With respect to Qatar, I already referred to you, dear Ambassador. Thank you very much for your intervention. And let me just emphasize something that you said too. You know, desertification and drought are extending in the Middle East and Africa very rapidly. And that was happening before, but is putting more pressure on the issues that we are talking about, on the need to make the right solutions for the emergency, but on linking the short-term with the long-term solutions for the climate change and the desertification and drought problems. You know, many times I say that we don't have to forget that the short and the long term start at the same time. You know, there is no long term if it is only a succession of short terms. We need to really make the solutions compatible, and the policy coherence on this is very important, like the Indonesian ambassador also said, and like you as the chair of the G20, yes, and the next G20 summit have put forward very, very clearly. So let me just end up saying again that we will continue with this effort, that the solutions that we have put forward are not solutions in the sky. They are possible. They need political will. They need your countries to support them and to push for them. That the humanitarian part is essential, and it will need more resources from the international community, and we have to give them the resources they need to really, you know, make the humanitarian action at scale as the world needs it. But in the development realm, the international financial system has the resources to cushion the blow and to really make it possible to avoid the domino effect that the interrelated crisis can bring to the developing world. So thank you all very much for your attention.
I thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD for her responses. We do in fact have another request for the floor. I may have missed it earlier. I apologize. I now invite the Ambassador of the United Kingdom to take the floor. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me. Morning, Excellencies, colleagues. Apologies for taking the floor a little bit late. I was a bit slow off the mark. I just wanted to start, of course, by joining others in echoing their thanks for this extremely helpful briefing this morning, and commending the Secretary General with the speed at which he's mobilized the UN system behind what is clearly a critical issue for all of us. And to echo many of the points that have already been made, I did have one question, though, for the Secretary General of UNCTAD, if I may. And that's really a little bit about the longer term implications of the war in Ukraine. I think a lot of the conversation we've had this morning and a lot of the recommendations and the solutions that you've put forward clearly and quite rightly deal with the immediate consequences of what is happening. But inevitably, we will see longer term consequences too. When we look at the destruction of Ukrainian infrastructure, production facilities, the impact on future harvests, both in Ukraine and regionally, I wondered if at this stage you're able to give a sense of how you see those longer term impacts playing out over the course of the months and the years ahead, and whether we should then expect to hear from you at some point a series of perhaps recommendations that look a little bit further into the future to try and get a better grip on how we can manage the consequences of this, as I say, as they roll out over the medium to longer term. Thanks very much indeed.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his question. Let me just check whether any other delegation would like to take the floor before giving the floor to the Secretary General. It doesn't seem to be the case. So I invite the Secretary General to respond. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And you know, let me say that we have had, when we put forward the recommendations, we were very careful in trying not to push for recommendations that will hurt the long term. Yes, for example, general subsidies on fuel. Yes, you know, people are hurting. What can we do to support families without hurting the transformation in the energy sector, you know, according to climate change and the SDGs. Yes, so that's why I was saying there are ways in which we can put this together. You know, what we do today to avoid losing sight of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, and make it compatible and coherent in terms of policy. So we are going deep into the countries, yes, to help governments prepare for the response, so to avoid the more difficult long-term consequences of this crisis, especially because of you know, the poor households and the necessary safety nets and social protection elements on this. Now, with respect to the harvest, our recommendation is to really provide fertilizer to the small and medium-sized farmers, yes, because the big farmers will be able to avoid the crisis, but the small and medium-sized farmers are not able to do that. So it's very important to have in sight not only lives, but also livelihoods. So we are putting a lot of emphasis also in the recommendations in our work with the government on the livelihoods part. And with respect to Ukraine, I think that is very important to keep open the infrastructure that is still functioning in Ukraine. There is infrastructure that have been destroyed that will require a huge reconstruction effort. But for the moment, there is a private sector out there. There is a lot of effort and action to be able to take out what they already harvest and to be able to go to harvest again. And we are working very hard with the forces within Ukraine, including the private sector, to make that viable. It's difficult for me to give details because that is, you know, being led by the Secretary General, and it's like another part of this crisis response that is being put together. But I want to assure you that there is a lot of thinking going on in making that happen. So to avoid in all the way possible the worst consequences. Consequences will be there, but the worst consequences of the crisis that we are living in.
I thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD for her response. With that, we have heard all speakers that have requested the floor. I thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD once again for her briefing and all delegations for joining. And with that, the briefing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.